Well, greetings and welcome back to the Wednesday Witness. I'm Reverend Laura Kigweba James. I serve as the Director of Grassroots Organizing at the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, and I will be your host for today. As a reminder, the Wednesday Witness is designed to be a short, no more than 30-minute virtual session that highlights current issues that we're working on at Church and Society. And we hope that these sessions truly equip you and your local churches to take action to create social change. All these sessions are recorded and available for later viewing on our YouTube page. And today we're going to be discussing legislation that supports Black single mothers, their families, and our communities. I'm so grateful for this conversation and to be joined by my colleague, Reverend Camille Henderson-Edwards, the Director of Economic, Health, and Gender, as well as for our first guest for the Wednesday Witness, Reverend Alisha Gordon. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes. Just as formal introduction, so folks know you, Reverend Gordon, do you want to present your bio? So Reverend Gordon is an awarded teacher, faith leader, and social strategist whose work intersects social advocacy and culture. She is the founder and executive director of The Current Project, a nonprofit organization committed to closing the social economic gaps for Black single mothers. Prior to The Current Project, she served as the executive minister of programs at the historic Riverside Church in the city of New York and as the director of faith-based initiatives for national and citywide political campaigns. Reverend Gordon is a native of Decatur, Georgia, a graduate of Spelman College with a Bachelor of English and a Master's of Divinity from Candler School of Theology at Emory University. Her work has been featured in national publications, media outlets, including Gray Television, Washington Bureau, and many more. She's awarded Emory University's Distinguished Top 40 Under 40 in 2019, and most recently appointed to the Alumni Board of Candler School of Theology. And Reverend Gordon is a mother to a college freshman and lives in Harlem with her dog, Cookie. That is incredible. Welcome, 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 welcome.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and jump right in for our conversation today. So Reverend Henderson-Edwards, in preparing for our conversation, you share that our advocacy as people of faith must center intersection of policy and real life. And in today's political landscape, where do you see this intersection? And how does this intersection relate to our moral witness as people of faith?
Yeah, well, yes, I think this is very much showing up in the child tax credit. We are in sort of like the end stages of the 117th Congress, and in the remaining weeks, the lame duck session, this mechanism of support is something that everyone is talking about and as they head into negotiations. So historically, the child tax credit is one of many tax credits that has been applied to help offset the cost of raising children. So when parents do their taxes, there have been certain monies that have been applied so that they don't have to pay as much in taxes. And the form of the child tax credit has shifted over time. It was first established in 1997 through the Taxpayer Relief Act. But during the pandemic, by way of the American Rescue Plan of 2021, the child tax credit was temporarily expanded. So payments for the child tax credit shifted. So for parents who have children under the age of 6, the payment amount went from $2,000 to $3,600. And for parents, families, people who have kids from 6 and above, the age range to receive up to $3,000 went from 16 to 17. So in addition to the amount being expanded, the method or the form by which the tax credit was applied was also expanded. So instead of receiving a payment or a benefit once a year, payments were given to families, parents, monthly throughout the course of 2021. And so this is when we say the expanded tax credit, that's what we mean. That's what we're talking about. And so since having that tax credit expanded in that way, we have been able to see benefits in terms of how families have been able to operate. So the Center on Poverty and Social Policy out of Columbia University, they reported that the expansion of this child tax credit reached over 61 million children in more than 36 million households. It was also reported that funds were primarily used for things like childcare and food and housing and other basic needs. All of this, we began to see that shifting the child tax credit in that way was doing its job, that it was being effective in terms of assisting families, working families, with being able to cover some of the costs, everyday costs, basic needs of raising a family with children. I think one of the things that I'm so glad that we have this conversation today, or having this conversation today, is because oftentimes I think that we sometimes disassociate what it is that's happening in Washington, D.C., in the halls of Congress, and how that translates to everyday life, right? That being able to have this child tax credit in the format that was applied for 2021 also is very much connected to the groceries that we buy, right? The groceries that parents are buying, how they're able to pay their rent each month, making sure that they are able to have what they need when they need it. And so our current landscape is that the expansion of this child tax credit was only applied to the 2021 tax year. It is no longer in effect. The child tax credit, as it has been expanded, has expired. And so the conversation begins in terms of our role is to advocate to make sure that we can extend the expanded child tax credit, especially because it has been proven to be effective. And so I think that in terms of the intersection of policy and everyday life, our advocacy is based on the fact that we have a moral imperative to make sure that our communities are thriving. And that time in terms of being able to speak to that, to influence that, is during this lame duck session in Congress. So we certainly want to make sure that we're having that conversation. And I think that's why we're gathered here today.
And if I could just jump in really quick to like nail this home, when that child tax credit expansion expired, 3.7 million children were thrust back into poverty. 3.7 million children were lifted out of poverty during that year and then thrust back into poverty when it expired, right? And so I think it's important that we're able to name the real realities. Like, this is not some kind of like political talking point.
That's
like
right.
Children and their families are really being impacted. And so like advocating for things like the expansion of child tax credit is really key when we think about the role that social services and things like TANF and SNAP and child tax credit plays. One last thing I want to make sure that I name, because I love data. There was a report from ProPublica that said there are $5.2 billion in TANF funds. So TANF is like cash assistance. It helps pay for SNAP, for WIC, all those types of different things that are being just left in the coffers of state governments all across this country. So across 50 states, there are $5.2 billion of unused funds that are not being trickled down to families. And I even go further to say, it says in 2019, for every 100 families in poverty, only 23 receive cash assistance, which is TANF, which was down from 68 families in 1996. And so we really have to make sure that we drive home that this is just, like I said, not a political talking point, but they're a real impact for the families that we serve across this denomination and across our communities.
Thank you both, Reverend Gordon and Reverend Henderson-Edwards, for speaking to the livelihood of this policy, often when we talk about policy, we don't see the connection to how it impacts like our everyday lives. And so to think about, did you say, remind me of the number, 3.4 million?
3.7 million children.
3.7 million children thrusted back into poverty, right? Just that number. And also for me, like that image of being able to have and now not to have, and our ability as people of faith, as constituents, to encourage our members of Congress to create legislation that actually provides for the livelihood of children and families. So just thank you both for naming that. So my next question goes to you, Reverend Gordon, about your work at the current project. Can you just speak to the work of the current project that centers and values Black single mothers, and just share more about the organization and the socioeconomic realities that you've already named, but if you can just speak to the impact of the socioeconomic realities on Black single mothers and families.
Yeah, so the current project, we're a nonprofit organization that aims to close the social and economic gap for Black single mothers. And I often say that, and it's like, man, that's a huge reach. But we do that by being really strategic about our programming, focusing on what data often shows are the key areas that are essential for getting a person out of surviving into thriving. And that's often around education, work access, and small business. And so we've had the privilege of really testing out some models around current economics and small business and work, and providing book stipends to moms to really get those barriers out of the way. We often find that, especially in this context where we are heavily reliant on local government to close these gaps. And what I find is that Black single mothers can't wait, right? Their families can't wait. And so we really focus on fundraising and doing strategic programming around those things. But what's really unique about our work is that we focus on what we call middler moms, like Bette Midler. These are moms who often out-earn social safety net, right? So they're working, they may be working multiple jobs, which now means they can't qualify for things like child tax credit, food stamps, TANF, but they actually under-earn to really economically thrive. And so when you think about this 4.2 million Black single mothers in this country who are out-earning social safety, many are out-earning social safety net, but under-earning, and how this median income for this group is around $48,000, right? So if you're in a family of four, in many states, earning that $48,000 has now kicked you out of the social safety net, right? And so our work is to not only think about how are our programs responsive to the needs of middler moms, these moms who often have high educational attainment, right? They're earning degrees, they're going back to school. I would consider myself a middler mom. They are often on the pursuit of higher paying jobs, but things like access to childcare, things like cost of living, like rent, things like food, cost of food gets in their way, medical bills, student loan bills. Black women are the highest earners of advanced degrees in this country, and we carry the highest load of student loan debt, right? So all of these things complicate the lives of Black single mothers. And as what I've seen is the most common household type of in most urban cities are led by Black mothers. Mm-hmm. What is it then, our work and our role to think about what is the trickle-down effect when we make real investments in the lives of Black single mothers, when we are concerned not only about their economic being and their social being, but their emotional well-being, right? Mm-hmm. These women who are responsible for the well-being of countless children, right? What are the long-term ripple impacts when we are focusing on the lives of Black single mothers and resourcing them in really meaningful ways? Then what is the outcome for the children, right? How are they able to show up to school when they're not worrying about being hungry? How are they able to show up to school when their mother actually has flex time on her job and access to childcare, so now that she can show up to PTA meetings? Or even more, what does it mean for her to have the kind of resourcing for her to be mindful of her own well-being, right? And so obviously our work at the current project is thinking about all of those things. And how do we create this kind of internal social safety net through our donors and through foundations and through, networks like this to really think about and give us the capacity to expand that work. And so that's a little bit about what we do. And I imagine that this conversation really drives home something that we say at the current project all the time. And that is that Black single mothers are one of the most innovative members of our community, right? Whether it's by default or by design, Black mothers have figured out to not only care for the lives of others, but really thinking about how do we get them in a position to thrive, across the board. And so that's what we do. I'm really excited to continue talking about these intersections of not just the programmatic piece, but the policy piece as well.
Yeah, to add to that, I think, as we were, reviewing legislation and there was legislation that had been proposed on the child tax credit and reporting that came out that said that I believe it was Mitt Romney's proposal wherein benefits of the child tax credit would be applied to children, but those who would be negatively affected in terms of like economic conditions were those of Black single mothers, right? And so I think that it's very important to name that part of our advocacy, right, is ensuring that we are caring for the whole family. That as we are working towards ending child poverty, that those children are connected to people as well. And making sure that as we're having this conversation around the child tax credit and around child poverty, that our advocacy is comprehensive, right? So the reason why many are pushing back on, the tax credit 2.0 proposal is because it has that adverse effect on the economic and social conditions of Black single mothers. Right. And to Alisha, what you said about the innovation of Black single mothers, I think we also have to lift that up, that I was raised by a Black single mother and I watched her do miracles. Okay. I watched her curate magic in raising me and my younger siblings. And Black women are doing that on a daily basis. We cannot sit and allow further legislation to make their job harder. That's right. I think that is also the impetus behind why it is so important to advocate for mechanisms like the expanded child tax credit.
That's good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I think for us as the United Methodist Church, right, we have it within our own social principles and social teachings, yes, around the importance of family and desiring for families to thrive, but also we have in the resolution 3061, we talk about the importance of Black family life specifically, and how as a church, we call upon local churches to develop programs, mentoring, counseling, conflict resolution, and strategies to strengthen the Black family. And so this isn't just something we're asking members of Congress to do, but it's also something as a church we're committed to doing. So just thank you to naming that and for us to be reminded of our social and collective witness. So I have my next question is for both of you, and specifically around, can you talk more about what are the community, and we talk about the child tax credit and the expansion of it, but if there's anything else around legislative-based solutions that can address the realities, these realities that we've named in a just and equitable way. So we have policy, we have the church, but are there any additional community-based solutions, legislative solutions that we also want to lift up in connection to the child tax credit?
You want to go first?
I'll go. So really quickly, in terms of advocacy within church and society, we know that those who are connected with church and society, you all should be receiving in your email inbox, if you have not already, an email from our agency. We have an action alert that is coming out so that you are able to communicate to your senator that this is a priority for you. I cannot stress enough the importance of engaging with policymakers through the mechanism of the action alert. That is something that is sent to our policymakers, and certainly when it is received in masses, as we have done before. I believe, I can't remember the exact number, but I think we shared in Wednesday Witnesses prior to this one, that there had been like some either 10 or 13,000, messages received from United Methodists to the United States Congress, advocating for a number of things. So I cannot stress enough the importance of engaging through the action alerts, letting your senator or representative know what is a priority for you as a voting member, as a voting constituent. And so we will have an action alert. You should receive an action alert on the child tax credit, letting your senators know that this is a priority for you, and as a result should be a priority for them as well. We do have other mechanisms, and so you can draft your message in the action alert, or you can use a message that we have already provided for you. But some of the additional talking points that we have around the child tax credit is that we are truly pushing for full refundability of the child tax credit as it has been expanded, right? And hopefully, prayerfully, will be continued beyond this year. So full refundability is very much important. And then I think that it's also important to note that morally, right, we as a people of faith must prioritize like people over money. And so the conversation has been, right, that we cannot satisfy or provide, research and development tax credits and other, major tax breaks for these corporations without also providing or having provisions for our children and for our families. So that in the same way that conversations are being had about making sure that corporations have what they need, the message must be clear that we must prioritize the child tax credit before we begin having conversations around tax breaks for major corporations. So just those are some of the things that both in action alerts, and then also there are many advocacy groups within the United Methodist Church from state to state, where you all are having conversations with your senators and with your members of Congress. And so those are some of the key points that we are also talking about here on the Hill.
That's good. Look, that's good stuff. As you were talking, I was thinking about, the question is around this community and legislative based solutions. And I think Camille, my sister, has hit the nail on the head. And I also want us to be mindful that though the lens here is about Black single mothers and about female head of households, is that when the formula works for the least of these,
right? Yes.
Like when the formula works for the least of these, then all folks, because some people may be listening is like, well, I'm not connected to Black single moms in that way, or the Black single moms come and get food from our food pantry on Tuesdays at 6:00, and that's really the only connection I have. But know and understand that as a moral witness, that when it works for the least of these, that the entire community has the capacity to thrive. And at the current project, we often say about lengthening the runway for Black single mothers, but this is about lengthening the runway for all marginalized communities, right? To say that what are the conditions that need to be in place for Black single mothers, for queer folk, for the disabled, for people who are differently able, for all folks who are on the margins to take off and fly, right? And so one of the things that we have been toying around about is when you talk about community-based solutions, community-based agreements. We see these popping up all across the country. How do we use that and social safety net resources like a child tax credit, right, to close the racial wealth gap for Black mothers? We imagine that, like, if we could get some successful policy measures such as a CBA with direct cash aid like child tax credit, we actually could accelerate the economic equality for Black single mothers, right? We actually have the capacity to move local governments, both on the executive and legislative, to work with corporate developers, right? What does it mean when you are trying to build a new high-rise building in Southwest Atlanta or the South Side of Chicago or Northwest DC, right? And what does it look like for governments to be really intentional about saying, well, hey, if you want to build in this community, we have one of the highest numbers of Black and brown female-led households in this neighborhood, right? So what does it mean to connect the prosperity of corporations to the prosperity of people in real meaningful ways, like doing something like a CBA? And so this notion of lengthening the runway and making sure that we are being intentional about the actions that we take, and that we don't disconnect from the narrative simply because it's not our own, right? But that we are actually able to see the longevity and the ripple effects of when we are caring for the least of these. We talk about this all the time, the fatherless and the widow. But as Camille said earlier, that fatherless child is connected to a whole human, and it's usually a mother, right? And so how are we intentional about aligning our moral witness to moral budgets and moral voting and moral policies that actually do the work that we proclaim to be the gospel?
Wow.
I mean,
like, thank you for the word, both of you. Thank you for the word. And that is the invitation of how will we tangibly care for the least of these. So we have heard the context. What are the next steps? So on our website, umcjustice.org, there is a faith and fact card that you can use around what the church says, our biblical witness around maternal health, as well as economics. So please find those resources. You can also, as Reverend Henderson-Edwards offered, the action alert will be coming your way to reach out to your members of Congress to advocate for the expansion of the child tax credit. And we encourage you to fill it out, to send it, and then also to follow up by calling your members of Congress to make sure that the legislation passes in this upcoming session. And lastly, continue to educate yourselves is the next step. So thank you so much for the current project and your resources, and specifically want to uplift the current economics project that you all have just launched, which is your signature economic and emotional wellness program that bridges unique experiences of Black single mothers to the important financial knowledge necessary to build capacity for economic thriving. So please educate, share, support, donate to the current project, especially with this upcoming Giving Tuesday. And just in closing, is there anything else, Reverend Gordon or Reverend Henderson-Edwards, that you want to offer before we end our time today?
I'm going to let Reverend Gordon have the last word. So I will just say very quickly that I think that it's very important to contextualize the advocacy that it is that we do. And hopefully it is something that we have said today that would encourage United Methodists to ask further questions. There's only so much that we can say in 30 minutes. And I do think that this format of Wednesday Witness is to serve as a catalyst for people to do their work in understanding the social conditions of people outside of their own. And that is my prayer, that we would do the work in better understanding the lived realities of another.
Since I got the last word. So the last thing I would love to offer in this conversation is two things: to interrogate and to agitate. Mm-hmm. To interrogate and to agitate, to interrogate our moral understanding, interrogate the scripture that we read, interrogate the way that we preach it, interrogate the programs that we create, interrogate. And this is not a challenge to dismantle or to just throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it is a call for us to interrogate our biases that often are deeply embedded in the way that we read scripture and talk about the lives of Black mothers, brown mothers, all the mothers, right? And to agitate. So we're agitating society to really wrestle and reckon with itself about how we vote for policies and for politicians who are in line with liberating marginalized folks. Right. And so that is the call to action that I have, is that we're going to interrogate scripture and agitate society until we get to a place where all people can really thrive.
Mhm.
Well, amen. Thank you both for your time. Thank you, Reverend Henderson-Edwards, for your expertise around the advocacy. Thank you, Reverend Gordon, for the incredible work that you're leading with the current project. I'm so grateful for you. And with you, I know that we will have the liberated futures that we deserve. So may we continue to support and follow. You can follow the current project at Current Project Incorporated. And we will see you next time for our next Wednesday Witness. Blessings.
Bye.